Welcome to Lesson 7.8 of the Grant Architect course. In this lesson, we explore implementation science and the REAIM framework, a comprehensive approach to evaluating program impact beyond individual level outcomes. Implementation science examines how evidence-based interventions are adopted, implemented, and sustained in real-world settings. This field has grown rapidly as researchers and practitioners recognize that effective interventions often fail when implemented outside research conditions. The REAIM framework provides a structured approach to evaluating implementation by examining reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance. These 5 dimensions capture the full picture of program impact from individual outcomes to organizational and community level effects. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how to apply the REAIM framework to strengthen evaluation plans and address implementation questions that many proposals overlook. Implementation science addresses a critical problem. The definition is the study of methods to promote uptake of research findings into practice. It examines how evidence-based programs translate to real-world settings. Focus is on how programs work in real-world settings, not just ideal conditions. Laboratory or tightly controlled conditions differ from messy reality. Implementation science studies that difference. The challenge is that effective interventions often fail in practice. Programs that work in research studies may not work when widely implemented. Something is lost in translation. The goal is closing the research to practice gap. Implementation science helps programs succeed not just in studies but in practice. Evaluation reports serve as the primary communication vehicle for findings and recommendations. Reports should be tailored to primary audiences while remaining accessible to secondary audiences. Technical details belong in appendices rather than the main text. Clear writing, logical organization, and professional formatting enhance readability and credibility. Allow adequate time for drafting, review, and revision. Executive summaries distill evaluation findings into concise overviews for busy decision makers who may not read full reports. Effective executive summaries stand alone as complete documents while accurately representing the full report. Length varies by context but typically ranges from 1 to 3 pages. Content should include brief program description, evaluation purpose and questions, key methods, major findings, and primary recommendations. Write in plain language accessible to non-technical readers. Lead with the most important findings rather than burying them. Use bullet points and clear headings for easy scanning. Avoid jargon and technical terminology. If technical terms are necessary, define them briefly. Executive summaries should motivate readers to examine the full report for details while providing sufficient information for those who read only the summary. Write the executive summary last after the full report is complete so it accurately reflects final content. The REAIM framework organizes implementation thinking. Reach asks who participates and how representative they are. Does the program reach those who need it or only easy-to-reach populations? Reach examines who benefits. Effectiveness asks what outcomes are achieved in real conditions, not lab conditions, real settings, real staff, real participants. Effectiveness in implementation science differs from efficacy in controlled trials. Adoption asks what settings and staff take up the program. Will organizations adopt it? Will staff implement it? Adoption considers organizational and individual uptake. Implementation asks whether the program is delivered as intended. Is fidelity maintained? Is quality adequate? Implementation examines delivery. Maintenance asks whether effects are sustained over time. Do outcomes persist? Does the program continue? Maintenance examines durability. Limitations sections acknowledge constraints on findings honestly without undermining key conclusions. All evaluations have limitations, and transparent acknowledgement enhances credibility. Discuss design limitations affecting causal inference, measurement limitations affecting construct validity, sampling limitations affecting generalizability, and analytical limitations affecting precision. Balance acknowledging limitations against overstating them in ways that obscure legitimate findings. Technical report structure follows conventions that help readers locate needed information efficiently. Front matter includes title page, acknowledgments, table of contents, and executive summary. An introduction section describes the program, evaluation purpose, and evaluation questions. A methods section details design, sampling, data collection, and analysis procedures with sufficient detail for replication and credibility assessment. A findings section presents results organized by evaluation question using text, tables, and figures appropriately. A discussion section interprets findings, addresses limitations, and offers conclusions. A recommendation section provides actionable suggestions based on findings. Appendices contain detailed materials such as instruments, protocols, and supplementary tables that would interrupt report flow. Report length varies with evaluation scope and audience expectations. Include enough detail to support conclusions while remaining accessible to intended readers. Effectiveness examines whether your program produces intended outcomes in real-world conditions. This dimension aligns with traditional outcome evaluation, but explicitly acknowledges that effectiveness in practice may differ from efficacy in controlled research conditions. Effectiveness assessment addresses whether participants experience positive outcomes, whether outcomes are clinically or practically meaningful beyond just statistically significant, whether there are unintended negative consequences, and how outcomes vary across participant subgroups. Effectiveness indicators include outcome measures at individual level, effect sizes indicating magnitude of change, participant-reported importance of changes, and subgroup analyses examining differential effectiveness. Effectiveness in the REAIM framework emphasizes real-world outcomes rather than outcomes achieved under ideal research conditions. This distinction matters because programs implemented in practice settings often produce smaller effects than the same programs in controlled trials. Assessing effectiveness requires clear outcome measures, appropriate comparison or baseline approaches, and attention to effect magnitude and practical significance. Report not just whether effects occurred, but how large they were and what they meant for participants. Tables organize numeric information efficiently for reference and comparison. Effective tables have clear titles describing content, labeled columns and rows, appropriate precision in numbers, and notes explaining abbreviations or conventions. Limit tables to information readers need rather than everything available. Design tables to stand alone without requiring text explanation. Follow formatting conventions appropriate to context. Data visualization transforms complex findings into accessible graphics that enhance understanding and engagement. Effective visualizations make patterns visible that might be obscured in tables or text. Choose visualization types appropriate to your data and message. Bar charts compare categories effectively. Line graphs show trends over time. Scatter plots reveal relationships between variables. Maps display geographic patterns. Design principles for effective visualization include minimizing chart junk and unnecessary decoration, using color purposefully and consistently, labeling clearly so graphics stand alone, and maintaining proportional accuracy that does not mislead. Consider your audience when designing visualizations. Technical audiences may appreciate detailed statistical graphics, while general audiences need simpler representations. Interactive visualizations in digital formats allow users to explore data but require accessible alternatives for those using assistive technologies or print formats. Implementation examines whether the program was delivered as intended, addressing fidelity to the intervention model and consistency across different delivery contexts. Implementation assessment answers several questions. Was the program delivered as designed with high fidelity? How consistently was the program implemented across sites, staff, or time periods? What adaptations were made and did they maintain core components? What resources were required for implementation? Implementation indicators include fidelity measures tracking adherence to the model, consistency metrics comparing delivery across contexts, adaptation documentation noting changes and their rationale, and resource tracking documenting staff time, costs, and other inputs. Implementation quality affects outcomes. Poor implementation often explains why programs fail to produce expected effects. Strong implementation fidelity suggests that outcomes reflect the intervention as designed rather than a diluted version. Assessing implementation requires clear specification of what the model includes, measurement of whether delivery matches the specification, and documentation of any adaptations. This assessment connects process to outcomes. Recommendations should flow logically from findings and be actionable by intended audiences. Avoid recommendations not supported by evidence or outside stakeholder control. Prioritize recommendations when many could be made. Consider feasibility, cost, and potential impact. Frame recommendations positively, focusing on what to do rather than what not to do. Involve stakeholders in developing recommendations to increase ownership and actionability. Presenting to different audiences requires adapting content, format, and language. Program staff need information relevant to implementation decisions presented with practical implications. Focus on what findings mean for their daily work and what they might do differently. Leadership and boards need strategic information relevant to program direction and resource allocation. Focus on bottom-line conclusions and major implications without methodological detail. Funders need accountability information demonstrating stewardship and impact. Focus on outcomes achieved relative to investment and how learning informs improvement. Community stakeholders need accessible information about program effects on their community. Use plain language, concrete examples, and formats accessible to diverse audiences. Adjust presentation length to context. 5 minutes requires ruthless prioritization of key messages. An hour allows comprehensive coverage with discussion. Applying REAIM to proposals strengthens your design. Reach asks how you will ensure broad representative participation. Address recruitment, barriers, and representativeness in your proposal. Effectiveness asks how you will measure real-world outcomes. Describe evaluation under actual implementation conditions, not idealized ones. Adoption asks how you will promote uptake by settings and staff. Describe training, support, and buy-in strategies. Implementation asks how you will monitor fidelity and quality. Describe your process evaluation and quality assurance approaches. Maintenance asks how you will sustain the program and outcomes. Connect to sustainability planning. Address long-term viability. Dissemination planning should begin during evaluation design, not after findings emerge. Identify key audiences and their information needs. Select dissemination channels appropriate to each audience. Develop a timeline for dissemination activities. Budget for dissemination, including staff time, production costs, and event expenses. Coordinate dissemination with organizational communications and stakeholder relations. Stakeholder engagement in interpretation strengthens evaluation use and validity. Involving stakeholders in making sense of findings increases ownership and likelihood of action. Different stakeholder groups bring different perspectives that enrich interpretation. Program staff understand implementation context that helps explain results. Participants know their own experiences and can validate or challenge evaluator interpretations. Leadership understands organizational constraints and opportunities affecting recommendations. Sense-making sessions bring stakeholders together to review findings, discuss meanings, and develop implications. Present findings accessibly without overwhelming detail. Facilitate discussion that surfaces different interpretations and seeks understanding of divergent views. Document stakeholder input and how it influenced final conclusions. Collaborative interpretation does not mean stakeholders dictate conclusions, but that their perspectives inform evaluator judgments. Evaluators retain responsibility for warranted conclusions while incorporating stakeholder knowledge. Common implementation challenges affect real-world success. Staff turnover means new staff need training. In research, the same trained staff deliver the program. In practice, staff turnover, training systems must accommodate this. Resource constraints mean real settings have less than research settings. Research may provide extra materials, supervision, or time. Real settings operate with standard resources. Competing priorities mean programs compete for attention. In research, the program is the focus. In practice, staff have many responsibilities. The program competes for attention. Drift means implementation quality declines over time. Initial implementation may be strong. Without ongoing support, quality drifts downward. Evaluation use represents the ultimate purpose of evaluation activities. Use occurs when evaluation influences decisions, improves programs, or advances knowledge. Instrumental use directly applies findings to decisions such as continuing, modifying, or terminating a program. Conceptual use influences thinking without direct action, gradually shaping understanding of issues over time. Symbolic use legitimizes predetermined positions, which can be appropriate when evidence genuinely supports decisions. Process use occurs when participation in evaluation builds stakeholder capacity or changes organizational practices regardless of findings. Factors affecting use include evaluation quality, relevance to information needs, timeliness of findings, credibility of evaluators, stakeholder involvement, organizational receptivity to evidence, and communication effectiveness. Evaluators can enhance use by attending to these factors throughout the evaluation process, not just at reporting time. Practical application of the REAIM framework involves systematically addressing each dimension in your evaluation design. Step 1 requires defining indicators for each REAIM dimension relevant to your project. What will you measure for reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance? Not all dimensions may be equally relevant for every project. Step 2 involves identifying data sources and methods for each indicator. Where will reach data come from? How will you assess implementation fidelity? What follow-up timeline enables maintenance assessment? Step 3 requires planning analysis approaches for each dimension. How will you assess whether you reached intended populations? How will you analyze outcome data? How will you document implementation variation? Step 4 involves considering how dimensions interact. How does reach affect effectiveness? How does implementation quality influence outcomes? How does adoption relate to maintenance? Step 5 asks you to present REAIM comprehensively in proposals. Even if you do not use the REAIM label, address its dimensions to demonstrate thorough implementation science thinking. Let us summarize the key points from this lesson on implementation science and the REAIM framework. Implementation science examines how evidence-based interventions are adopted, implemented, and sustained in real-world settings. This field addresses why effective interventions often fail when implemented outside research conditions. The REAIM framework provides a structured approach to comprehensive evaluation addressing reach, examining who participates, effectiveness examining whether outcomes occur, adoption examining organizational uptake, implementation examining delivery fidelity, and maintenance examining sustainability. Each dimension contributes to understanding overall program impact. Applying REAIM strengthens evaluation by ensuring attention to implementation factors that affect success. Address each dimension with appropriate indicators, data sources, and analysis approaches. Present REAIM thinking in proposals even if not using the framework label. Demonstrate awareness that individual outcomes are only part of the implementation picture. Funders increasingly value implementation science perspectives that address real-world implementation challenges. In our next lesson, we will explore the choice between internal and external evaluators and how to budget appropriately for evaluation activities.